Chuck Norris wasn't always the larger-than-life action star we know today. Long before he became a global icon, celebrated for his martial arts skills and tough guy roles, he was just Carlos Ray Norris, a young man from Ryan, Oklahoma, with dreams of serving his country. Growing up in a modest household, Chuck learned early on about hard work and discipline. These values stayed with him throughout his life, shaping not only his career, but also his character. In 1958, at the age of 18, Chuck joined the United States Air Force. He wanted to serve his nation and make a difference. Assigned to Osan Air Base in South Korea, Norris worked as an air policeman. His role involved maintaining security on the base and ensuring the safety of personnel and equipment. While it wasn't glamorous, it instilled in him a deep sense of responsibility and pride. During this time, Norris also discovered his passion for martial arts. Stationed far from home, he began practicing Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art that would later become a cornerstone of his identity. After completing his service in 1962, Chuck returned to civilian life with an honorable discharge. By then, he had grown into a disciplined and focused individual, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did he know that his military experience would eventually play a significant role decades down the line. Not in the way he expected, but in a manner that tested both his patience and resilience. Fast forward to 2023, Chuck Norris is now a retired Hollywood legend. At 83 years old, he spends most of his days enjoying quiet moments away from the spotlight. Though his fame has brought him wealth and recognition, Norris remains grounded. He often reflects on his journey, from his humble beginnings to becoming one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment. But more than anything, he cherishes the memories of his time in the Air Force. Those years shaped him into the man he is today, and he carries that legacy with pride. One day, while going through some old boxes in his garage, Chuck stumbled upon his military documents. Among them were his discharge papers and other official records proving his service. Seeing these items sparked an idea. Many veterans across America use special veteran ID cards to access benefits like discounts at stores, entry to military bases, and participation in community events. Chuck thought it might be nice to have one too. After all, why shouldn't he carry something tangible that honors his contributions? So without much fuss, Chuck filled out the necessary forms and sent them off to the appropriate government office. It seemed like a straightforward process, almost mundane. He didn't expect any issues. After all, his service record was clear, and his discharge was honorable. The application asked for basic details: name, dates of service, branch of the military, and proof of discharge. Chuck double-checked everything before mailing it off, confident that the card would arrive in no time. But weeks went by, and there was no response. Finally, one morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. Chuck opened it, expecting to find his shiny new veteran ID card inside. Instead, what he found left him stunned. The letter stated that his application had been denied due to insufficient evidence of his honorable discharge. Insufficient evidence? How could that be? Chuck stared at the words, unable to believe what he was reading. At first, he thought it must be a mistake, a simple clerical error that could easily be fixed. Maybe someone lost his paperwork or misplaced his file. But as he reread the letter, frustration began to creep in. This wasn't just any piece of plastic. It represented years of dedication and sacrifice. For Chuck, it symbolized not only his personal journey, but also the respect owed to anyone who served their country faithfully. Determined to resolve the issue, Chuck decided to reach out directly to the Veterans Administration, VA. Surely once they realized who he was, and more importantly what he had done, they'd see the error and rectify it immediately. But things weren't so simple. When he called the VA hotline, he found himself caught in a maze of automated menus and long wait times. Eventually, he managed to speak with a representative, who assured him they'd look into the matter. Still, nothing changed. Days turned into weeks, and Chuck grew increasingly disheartened. By now, the situation was starting to weigh on him, emotionally. Here was a man who had faced countless adversaries on screen and emerged victorious every time. Yet, in real life, He couldn't even get a basic form of recognition for his service. To make matters worse, friends and family encouraged him to go public with the story, thinking it might speed up the process. But Chuck hesitated. He didn't want to come across as bitter or ungrateful. All he wanted was fairness, a chance, to prove that he had earned the right to call himself a veteran. Despite his reluctance, whispers of the controversy began spreading. Local news outlets picked up the story, painting a picture of disbelief. Could it really be true that Chuck Norris, the same man whose fictional exploits made millions cheer, was being denied a veteran ID? As the story gained traction, public sentiment shifted from shock to outrage. People started asking questions. If this could happen to someone as famous as Chuck Norris, what hope did ordinary veterans have? And yet, through it all, Chuck remained calm. He knew that solving the problem wouldn't come from anger or blame, but from persistence and understanding. Deep down, he hoped that this incident would shine a light on the struggles many veterans face when dealing with bureaucracy. Perhaps, he thought, this moment of humiliation could lead to something greater, a chance to improve the system for everyone. Little did Chuck know, help was already on the way. What happened next would change everything, not just for him, but for countless others who had walked the same path. The rejection letter hit Chuck Norris like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the words themselves, insufficient evidence of honorable discharge, that stung. It was the implication behind them. How could someone who had proudly served his country, even if decades ago, be told that his service didn't count? For a man known for his strength and resilience, this moment felt like one of his toughest battles yet. And it wasn't even physical. Chuck tried not to let it get to him at first. He figured it must have been some kind of mix-up, a clerical error that could easily be fixed with a phone call or two. After all, how hard could it be to prove something as straightforward as military service? So, he picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on the rejection letter. What followed was an experience that left him shaking his head in disbelief. First, there was the automated system, a robotic voice guiding him through endless menus. Press 1 for benefits, press 2 for records, press 3 to scream into the void. Chuck pressed the appropriate buttons only to find himself stuck on hold for what felt like hours. When he finally reached a human being, the conversation wasn't much better. The representative on the other end sounded sympathetic but ultimately powerless. "Sir," they explained, "we need more documentation to verify your claim." Documentation? Chuck couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had already provided everything they asked for. His name, his dates of service, and copies of his discharge papers. What else could they possibly want? Frustrated but determined, Chuck promised to send additional proof. He rummaged through old boxes searching for anything that might help. Letters from his time in Korea, photos of him in uniform, even commendations he'd received during his service. He gathered everything together and mailed it off, hoping this would put an end to the nightmare. But days turned into weeks and still nothing changed. Another envelope arrived in the mail, bearing the same disappointing news. Denied. This time Chuck felt anger bubbling beneath the surface. Not because of the inconvenience, but because of what it represented. To him, this wasn't just about a piece of plastic. It was about respect. Respect for the sacrifices he and countless others had made while wearing their nation's uniform. And now here he was, being told that his efforts weren't enough. As word of Chuck's struggle began to spread, people started talking. Friends, family members, and even strangers who heard about the situation urged him to go public. "If anyone can bring attention to this issue, it's you," they said. But Chuck hesitated. He didn't want to come across as bitter or self-centered. More than anything, he wanted to resolve the matter quietly without making a fuss. Yet despite his best efforts to keep things under wraps, the story leaked to the media, and once it did, there was no turning back. Headlines exploded across newspapers and online platforms. Chuck Norris denied veteran ID card. Social media lit up with reactions ranging from outrage to disbelief. Late-night comedians cracked jokes about the irony of the world's toughest man being denied something so simple. One comedian quipped, "If Chuck Norris can't get a veteran ID, maybe we should rethink our priorities as a country." While some laughed, others saw the humor as a way to highlight a deeper problem. For many veterans watching the saga unfold, Chuck's experience struck a nerve. They knew all too well the frustrations of dealing with bureaucratic red tape. Countless men and women who had served their country found themselves fighting for recognition, benefits, or even basic respect, long after their time in uniform had ended. Chuck's story became a symbol of those struggles, a reminder that even heroes aren't immune to the inefficiencies of the system. Despite the growing attention, Chuck chose to remain silent publicly. Behind closed doors, however, the humiliation gnawed at him. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, wondering where things had gone wrong. Was it something he did? Had he missed a step in the application process? Or was this simply a sign of larger issues within the Veterans Administration? One evening, sitting alone in his study, Chuck pulled out the rejection letter again. He stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for an old photo album tucked away on a shelf. Flipping through its pages, he found pictures of himself as a young air policeman, standing tall in his uniform, smiling alongside fellow service members. Those images brought back memories of camaraderie, discipline, and purpose. They reminded him of why he had joined the military in the first place, to serve something greater than himself. As he looked at those faded photographs, Chuck realized that this ordeal wasn't just about him anymore. If his story could shine a light on the challenges faced by veterans everywhere, then perhaps it was worth sharing. Maybe, just maybe, his voice could help spark change, not just for himself, but for others who deserved better. Still, the weight of the rejection lingered. Every morning when he woke up, every night before he went to bed, the question haunted him. Why was this happening? Was it incompetence, oversight, or something else entirely? The lack of answers only deepened his frustration. Chuck had always prided himself on solving problems head-on, whether in the ring or on the big screen. But this was different. This was real life, messy and unpredictable, and it seemed like no amount of determination could fix it overnight. Unbeknownst to Chuck, though, wheels were already in motion. High-ranking officials within the Pentagon had caught wind of the controversy and were taking notice. As public pressure mounted, influential figures began calling for accountability. Among them was Senator John McCain, a decorated war hero and staunch advocate for veterans' rights. McCain issued a statement condemning the mishandling of Chuck's case, calling it an insult to all who have worn the uniform. His words carried weight, prompting immediate action from top brass. Meanwhile, representatives from the Pentagon reached out to Chuck personally. They assured him that the matter was being investigated thoroughly and apologized for the oversight. For the first time since the ordeal began, Chuck felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps justice would prevail after all. But even as the tide began to turn, Chuck couldn't shake the feeling that this experience had changed him. It had forced him to confront vulnerabilities he rarely showed to the world. Fame and fortune may have shielded him from many hardships, but this battle reminded him that everyone, even someone like Chuck Norris, is human. And sometimes even heroes need help. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Chuck vowed to see it through. Not just for himself, but for the countless veterans who deserved better. Little did he know, the resolution to this saga would come, sooner than expected, and with it, a chance to rewrite the narrative for good. The media storm surrounding Chuck Norris's veteran ID denial grew louder with each passing day. What started as a quiet personal struggle quickly spiraled into a national conversation. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Chuck Norris denied veteran status, screamed one headline. Another read, "How could this happen to America's toughest man?" It seemed like everyone had an opinion, from journalists and politicians to everyday citizens who admired Norris for his larger-than-life persona. Late-night talk shows were especially quick to jump on the bandwagon. Comedians poked fun at the absurdity of the situation, imagining scenarios where Chuck Norris tried and failed to prove his identity. One host joked, "If Chuck Norris can't get a veteran ID, maybe we should let him redesign the entire system. I bet he could roundhouse, kick some sense into it." The jokes landed because they highlighted the irony of the situation. Here was a man whose fictional exploits made him seem unstoppable. Yet in real life he was stuck battling red tape that wouldn't budge. But not everyone found humor in the ordeal. For many veterans across the country, Chuck's story hit close, to home. They saw themselves in his predicament, a frustrating fight against bureaucracy that often left them feeling invisible. Social media became a battleground of opinions with hashtags like Justice for Chuck and Fix the VA trending nationwide. Veterans shared their own stories of delays, lost paperwork, and endless appeals. Some praised Chuck for bringing attention to the issue, while others expressed disappointment that it took someone famous to highlight problems they'd been facing for years. Amid the chaos, Chuck Norris remained silent. He avoided interviews, declined comment requests, and stayed out of the spotlight. Friends and family urged him to speak up, thinking his voice might speed things along. But Chuck didn't want to add fuel to the fire or come across as bitter. Instead, he focused on resolving the matter privately, hoping that patience and persistence would eventually pay off. Behind closed doors, however, the weight of the situation gnawed at him. Every time he turned on the TV or opened a newspaper, he saw his name attached to headlines mocking the very system he once trusted. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was humiliating. Chuck had always carried himself with dignity, proud of his service and the values it instilled in him. Now he felt as though that pride had been stripped away piece by piece. One evening, unable to sleep, Chuck wandered into his living room and switched on the television. A late-night news segment caught his eye. The anchor was discussing his case, juxtaposing clips of Chuck's action-packed movies with images of him in his Air Force uniform. As the screen flashed back and forth between the two versions of Chuck, the Hollywood legend versus the young air policeman, he felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he appreciated the recognition. On the other, he wished people understood that this wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about fairness. The next morning, Chuck decided to take matters into his own hands again. He called a friend who worked as a lawyer specializing in veterans' rights. Together, they drafted a formal appeal letter, outlining every detail of his service and attaching copies of all available documentation. They sent it directly to the highest levels of the Veterans Administration, hoping someone would finally listen. While waiting for a response, Chuck began reflecting on his journey. He realized that this experience had forced him to confront vulnerabilities he rarely showed to the world. Fame may have shielded him from many hardships, but this battle reminded him that even heroes are human. Everyone needs help sometimes, even someone like Chuck Norris. As days turned into weeks, public pressure continued to mount. Influential figures stepped forward to demand answers. Among them was Senator John McCain, a decorated war hero and longtime advocate for veterans' rights. In a fiery speech on Capitol Hill, McCain condemned the mishandling of Chuck's case, calling it an insult to all who have worn the uniform. His words resonated deeply, prompting immediate action from top officials within the Pentagon. Meanwhile, grassroots efforts gained momentum. Veterans organizations rallied around Chuck, organizing petitions and awareness campaigns. Thousands of signatures poured in, urging the government to rectify the mistake. Even ordinary citizens who had never served in the military joined the cause, recognizing the importance of honoring those who did. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chuck received a phone call. It was from a high-ranking official at the Pentagon. The caller apologized profusely for the oversight and assured Chuck that the matter was being investigated thoroughly. They explained that preliminary findings suggested his original discharge. Papers had been misplaced decades earlier during a records transfer, an administrative error that should never have occurred. Hearing this gave Chuck a glimmer of hope, but he remained cautious. Promises were one thing, actions were another. To Chuck's surprise, the Pentagon didn't stop at mere apologies. Within days, representatives arranged a private meeting with him to discuss next steps. During the meeting, officials presented new evidence confirming his honorable discharge. They also promised to streamline the process for issuing his veteran ID card without further delay. More importantly, they vowed to review their archiving procedures to prevent similar mistakes in the future. Though relief washed over Chuck, he couldn't shake the thought that this ordeal had exposed flaws in the system. If something like this could happen to him, with his resources and connections, what chance did ordinary veterans have? Determined to make a difference, Chuck resolved to use his platform to advocate for change. He thanked the Pentagon officials for their efforts but emphasized the need for broader reforms. By now, the media frenzy had reached its peak. Reporters camped outside Chuck's property, eager for any update. When word leaked that the Pentagon had intervened, speculation ran wild. Was this the end of the saga? Would Chuck finally receive the recognition he deserved? Public anticipation reached fever pitch, setting the stage for what promised to be a moment of redemption, not just for Chuck, but for veterans everywhere. Though the outcome was still uncertain, Chuck felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew this experience had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It had reminded him of the power of perseverance, humility, and standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Little did he know the resolution to this saga would come sooner than expected, and with it a chance to rewrite the narrative for good. For Chuck Norris, this wasn't just about getting a piece of plastic. It was about restoring faith in the system, in humanity, and in himself. And as he prepared to face the final chapter of this unexpected journey, he vowed to ensure that no veteran would ever feel forgotten again. The turning point in Chuck Norris's veteran ID saga came unexpectedly, but it felt like a ray of light breaking through a storm cloud that had hovered over him for far too long. One evening, as he sat quietly in his study flipping through old photographs from his Air Force days, the phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Curious, Chuck picked up the receiver, and on the other end was a high-ranking official from the Pentagon. "Mr. Norris," the voice began, warm yet formal. "I'm calling to personally apologize for the oversight regarding your veteran ID application. We've been made aware of the situation, and I assure you we're taking immediate steps to resolve this." Chuck listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to cautious optimism. The official went on to explain that, after reviewing his case, they discovered a major clerical error dating back decades. During a massive transfer of military records in the 1970s, long before computers were widely used, some files had been misplaced or improperly archived. Among them was Chuck's original discharge paperwork. This bureaucratic snafu meant his service record wasn't easily accessible when his application was processed. For the first time since the ordeal began, Chuck felt a flicker of hope. He thanked the official for reaching out but couldn't help asking the question weighing heavily on his mind. Why did it take so long to figure this out? And why does it seem like nothing gets fixed unless someone famous is involved? The official hesitated briefly before responding. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Norris. This system has flaws, and your case has highlighted how those flaws impact real people, veterans who deserve better. Please know we're committed to making things right, not just for you, but for everyone affected by these oversights." Hearing those words gave Chuck a sense of validation. For weeks, he'd wrestled with feelings of frustration and embarrassment, wondering if anyone truly understood what he was going through. Now finally there was acknowledgement, not just of his individual plight, but of the broader issues within the Veterans Administration, VA, and related agencies. The Pentagon didn't stop at apologies. Within days, representatives arranged a private meeting with Chuck to present new evidence confirming his honorable discharge. They brought along copies of archived documents retrieved from deep storage, including handwritten notes and service logs that verified every detail of his time in the Air Force. Seeing those papers laid out before him stirred something inside Chuck, a mix of pride and relief. It was proof, tangible and undeniable, of the years he had spent serving his country. But the Pentagon officials weren't done yet. They explained that they were fast-tracking the issuance of his veteran ID card and promised it would arrive within days. More importantly, they outlined plans to overhaul their record-keeping processes to prevent similar mistakes in the future. New digital systems would be implemented to ensure no veteran service history could ever fall through the cracks again. Chuck nodded approvingly, though part of him wondered whether such promises would translate into action. As news of the Pentagon's intervention spread, public sentiment shifted once again. Headlines now read, Pentagon steps up for Chuck Norris after veteran ID denial, and justice served, how one man's fight could change the system. Veterans advocacy groups praised the move, calling it a step in the right direction. Many hoped this moment would mark the beginning of lasting reforms, not just for celebrities like Chuck, but for all veterans struggling to navigate the labyrinthine bureaucracy. Despite the progress, Chuck remained grounded. He knew the media circus surrounding his case might overshadow the bigger picture. So he decided to address the public directly, not through interviews or press conferences, but via a heartfelt letter posted on social media. In it, he expressed gratitude for the support he'd received and acknowledged the efforts of the Pentagon. But he also emphasized the need for continued vigilance. I never wanted this to become about me, Chuck wrote. This isn't about fame or recognition. It's about fairness, for every man and woman who has served our nation with honor. My experience has shown me how broken the system can be, and I refuse to let this moment pass without using my platform to push for change. His words resonated deeply. Thousands of comments poured in, thanking him for shining a light on the struggles faced by countless veterans. Some shared their own stories of battling the VA, while others pledged to join the fight for reform. Chuck's humility struck a chord, reminding people that even heroes are human, and that sometimes standing up for justice requires vulnerability. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Chuck worked tirelessly to amplify the voices of those less fortunate. He reached out to veterans organizations, offering his resources and influence to support their causes. He collaborated with lawmakers like Senator John McCain, discussing ways to hold government agencies accountable and improve services for veterans. Though he preferred staying out of the limelight, Chuck recognized that his celebrity status gave him a unique opportunity to make a difference. Days later, the long-awaited veteran ID card arrived in the mail. Holding it in his hands, Chuck felt a wave of emotions wash over him. On one level, it was just a small piece of plastic, a tool to access discounts and base privileges. But on another level, it represented so much more: validation, respect, and closure. For months, he had carried the weight of rejection, wondering if he'd ever see justice. Now here it was, a tangible reminder that persistence pays off. Still, Chuck couldn't shake the thought that his victory was bittersweet. He knew many veterans still faced uphill battles, often without the resources or connections to navigate the system effectively. Determined to keep fighting, he announced plans to establish a foundation aimed at assisting veterans dealing with bureaucratic hurdles. The organization would provide legal aid, counseling, and advocacy services, all designed to ensure no one else had to endure what he had. As word of his initiative spread, donations poured in from across the country. Celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike rallied behind the cause, inspired by Chuck's determination to turn a personal setback into a force for good. Even late-night comedians, who had initially joked about his predicament, now praised him for his resilience and leadership. Through it all, Chuck remained humble. He understood that this journey wasn't about proving himself. It was about proving something greater, that even in moments of adversity, there's always room for growth, compassion, and change. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Chuck was ready to face it head-on. After all, if there's one thing Chuck Norris knows how to do, it's persevere. With his veteran ID safely tucked away in his wallet and a renewed sense of purpose driving him forward, Chuck prepared for the next chapter of his life. Little did he know, the lessons he learned during this ordeal would shape not only his legacy, but also the lives of countless others for years to come. The moment Chuck Norris finally received his veteran ID card marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for countless others who had been silently struggling with similar battles. The Pentagon made sure this occasion wasn't treated as just another routine administrative fix. They understood its symbolic importance. So when the time came to present Chuck with his long-awaited ID, it was done in a way that honored his service and acknowledged the broader significance of the moment. On a crisp morning at a private ceremony held inside a military base near Washington, D.C., Chuck stood alongside high-ranking officials from the Pentagon, including the Secretary of Defense himself. Rows of chairs were filled with veterans, active duty service members, and representatives from various veterans organizations. Media cameras lined the back of the room, capturing every detail of the event. But despite the formal setting, the atmosphere was warm and respectful. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about recognition and gratitude. As Chuck took his place at the podium, he looked out over the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of those gathered. Many of them wore uniforms or hats adorned with unit patches, each emblem telling a story of sacrifice and duty. Others carried themselves with quiet dignity, their presence speaking volumes about the pride they felt in serving their country. For Chuck, standing there among them felt like coming home. It reminded him of his days in the Air Force, surrounded by men and women who shared a common purpose. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward to deliver an official apology on behalf of the government. His speech was heartfelt, acknowledging not only the error in Chuck's case, but also the systemic issues that had allowed such mistakes to happen in the first place. "We owe our veterans nothing less than excellence," he said firmly. "And today we reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that every man and woman who has served this nation receives the respect and recognition they deserve." When it was Chuck's turn to speak, the room fell silent. He began by thanking everyone involved in resolving his case, from the Pentagon officials to the grassroots advocates who had rallied around him. Then, pausing for a moment, he addressed the veterans directly. "I'm no different from any of you," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "What happened to me could have happened to anyone, and that's why I refuse to let this end here. We need to make sure no veteran ever feels forgotten or worse, dismissed because of red tape or bureaucracy." His words struck a chord. Veterans in the audience nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. They knew all too well the frustration of navigating complex systems, often feeling powerless against forces beyond their control. Chuck's experience had given them hope, not because he was famous, but because he refused to give up. His persistence had shown them that change was possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. After the speeches, the Secretary of Defense handed Chuck his veteran ID card. As Chuck held it up for everyone to see, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment. For Chuck, it was more than just a piece of plastic. It was validation, proof that his service mattered. But what truly moved him was the reaction of the veterans around him. Their smiles, cheers, and standing ovation told him that this victory belonged to all of them. In the weeks following the ceremony, Chuck wasted no time putting his plans into action. True to his word, he founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping veterans navigate the bureaucratic challenges they faced. Named Veterans First Alliance, the initiative aimed to provide free legal assistance, counseling services, and advocacy resources to those in need. Chuck partnered with lawyers specializing in veterans' rights, mental health professionals, and former military personnel who understood the unique struggles veterans encountered. Word of the foundation spread quickly, thanks in part to Chuck's fame, but also because of the genuine goodwill behind the project. Donations poured in from across the country, ranging from small contributions by everyday citizens to large grants from corporations eager to support the cause. Even celebrities joined the effort, hosting fundraisers and using their platforms to raise awareness. Late-night comedians, once quick to joke about Chuck's predicament, now praised him for turning adversity into action. One host quipped, "If Chuck Norris can take down bad guys in movies, imagine what he'll do to government red tape." Chuck threw himself into the work with characteristic determination. He traveled to cities across America, meeting with veterans, and listening to their stories. In town halls and community centers, he sat face-to-face with men and women who had served in conflicts spanning Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. Each encounter reinforced his belief that the system needed reform, and that reform would only come through collective effort. One particularly poignant meeting took place in Texas, where Chuck met a veteran named James, a former Marine struggling to secure disability benefits after being injured during deployment. James had spent years battling paperwork, appeals, and endless delays, leaving him financially strained and emotionally drained. When Chuck heard his story, he immediately connected him with one of the foundation's attorneys. Within months, James finally received the compensation he deserved, a life-changing outcome that brought tears to his eyes. Stories like James's became the heart of the foundation's mission. Every success fueled Chuck's resolve to keep pushing for systemic change. He worked closely with lawmakers, testifying before Congress to advocate for policies that streamlined the claims process and improved access to health care for veterans. His testimony carried weight not only because of his celebrity status but because of his authenticity. Lawmakers listened intently as he spoke passionately about the human cost of inefficiency and neglect. Beyond policy changes, Chuck focused on building a sense of community among veterans. He organized events designed to bring people together, job fairs, networking sessions, and recreational activities like fishing trips and martial arts workshops. These gatherings provided opportunities for veterans to connect, share experiences, and find camaraderie outside the battlefield. For many, it was the first time they felt truly seen and valued since leaving the military. The impact of Chuck's efforts extended far beyond individual cases. His advocacy inspired a wave of reforms within the VA and other government agencies. New digital systems were implemented to track veterans' records more efficiently, reducing the risk of lost files or errors. Training programs were developed to educate staff on best practices for handling claims and communicating with veterans. Public awareness campaigns highlighted the importance of supporting those who had served, encouraging civilians to get involved in volunteer initiatives. Through it all, Chuck remained humble. Despite the accolades and praise he received, he insisted that the real heroes were the veterans themselves, the men and women who had sacrificed so much for their country. "I didn't start this foundation to be celebrated," he often said. "I started it because I saw a problem and wanted to help fix it. That's what anyone should do when they see injustice." By the time the first anniversary of receiving his veteran ID rolled around, Chuck's foundation had assisted thousands of veterans nationwide. Its success proved that one person's determination could spark meaningful change. Yet for Chuck, the work was far from over. He knew that while progress had been made, there was still much to be done. The fight for veterans' rights was ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. Reflecting on the past year, Chuck felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun as a deeply personal struggle had transformed into something greater, a movement fueled by compassion, resilience, and unity. He realized that true strength wasn't measured by physical prowess or fame, but by the willingness to stand up for others, especially when the odds seemed stacked against them. And so, Chuck continued his mission, driven by the belief that every veteran deserved to be recognized, respected, and supported. His journey had taught him that even in moments of humiliation, there was always room for growth, and that sometimes the greatest victories weren't won on screen but in the quiet triumphs of everyday life. Chuck Norris's journey from rejection to redemption became more than just a personal victory. It evolved into a legacy that transcended his fame as an action star. The lessons he learned during this ordeal stayed with him long after the headlines faded and the cameras stopped rolling. What began as a frustrating battle over a veteran ID card transformed into a lifelong commitment to improving the lives of those who served their country. For Chuck, this chapter wasn't about proving himself. It was about proving something far greater, that even in moments of adversity, there's always room for growth, compassion, and meaningful change. Years passed, and Chuck's foundation, Veterans First Alliance, continued to grow. It became a beacon of hope for countless veterans across America, offering not only practical assistance, but also a sense of belonging. Veterans who had once felt isolated or forgotten found themselves welcomed into a community that understood their struggles and celebrated their sacrifices. Whether it was helping someone secure disability benefits, providing legal aid for appeals, or simply creating spaces where veterans could connect and share stories, the foundation touched lives in ways Chuck never imagined possible. One of the most impactful programs launched by the foundation was its mentorship initiative. Recognizing that transitioning back to civilian life was one of the toughest challenges many veterans faced, Chuck partnered with successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, and fellow veterans to create a network of mentors. These mentors worked closely with younger veterans, guiding them through career changes, education opportunities, and personal development. Many participants credited the program with giving them a renewed sense of purpose after leaving the military. Chuck also remained deeply involved in advocating for policy reforms at both state and federal levels. He traveled to Washington, D.C., multiple times each year to meet with lawmakers, urging them to prioritize veterans' issues. His testimony before Congress carried weight not because of his celebrity status, but because of his authenticity and first-hand understanding of the challenges veterans faced. Lawmakers listened intently as he shared stories of men and women whose lives had been upended by bureaucratic inefficiencies, and how small changes could make a world of difference. The policies championed by Chuck was the implementation of a centralized digital database for all military records. This system ensured that no veteran's service history would ever be lost again due to clerical errors or misplaced paperwork. Additionally, new training protocols were introduced for VA employees, emphasizing empathy and efficiency when dealing with claims. These reforms may have seemed technical on paper, but for veterans they represented tangible improvements in their day-to-day interactions with the government. Outside of advocacy work, Chuck used his platform to highlight the humanity behind the uniform. He wrote a book titled Unseen Valor: Stories of Service and Sacrifice, which featured interviews with veterans from different generations and backgrounds. Each story showcased the unique experiences of those who had served, reminding readers that every veteran carried a piece of history within them. Proceeds from the book went directly to funding scholarships for veterans pursuing higher education, a cause close to Chuck's heart. The scholarship program quickly became one of the Foundation's flagship initiatives. Named in honor of Chuck's late father, a World War II veteran, the scholarships provided financial support to veterans seeking degrees in fields ranging from engineering to healthcare to creative arts. Recipients often described receiving the scholarship as a turning point in their lives, allowing them to pursue dreams they thought were out of reach. One recipient, a single mother and former Army medic, earned her nursing degree and went on to work in underserved communities, paying forward the kindness she had received. Despite his busy schedule, Chuck made time to attend events hosted by the Foundation, whether it was a job fair in Texas, a fishing trip in Montana, or a martial arts workshop in California. These gatherings gave him the chance to connect personally with veterans, listen to their concerns, and celebrate their achievements. At one such event, a young Marine approached Chuck with tears in his eyes. "You saved my life," the man said quietly. Chuck didn't argue or deflect the compliment. He simply hugged the Marine and replied, "No, you saved mine." As the years went by, Chuck's efforts earned widespread recognition. Awards poured in from organizations dedicated to veterans' causes, including prestigious honors from the Department of Defense and national veterans groups. Yet, for Chuck, the true reward lay in knowing that he had made a difference, not just for individuals, but for the system as a whole. The reforms sparked by his case set a precedent for accountability and transparency within government agencies, ensuring that future generations of veterans wouldn't face the same hurdles. Even in retirement, Chuck refused to slow down. Now, in his 80s, he continued to speak out on behalf of veterans, using social media and public appearances to keep the conversation going. He encouraged younger celebrities and influencers to join the cause, passing the torch to a new generation of advocates. "This isn't my fight alone," he told them. "It's ours, together." Reflecting on his journey, Chuck often marveled at how one small moment of humiliation had led to so much good. Had he not been denied his veteran ID card, he might never have realized the extent of the challenges facing veterans, or discovered his own capacity to drive change. That painful experience taught him humility, patience, and the power of persistence. It reminded him that even heroes need help sometimes, and that asking for it isn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. In interviews, Chuck frequently returned to the idea that resilience isn't about avoiding failure, it's about learning from it. Life is full of curveballs, he said. What matters isn't how hard you fall, it's how you get back up. And if you can use your struggles to lift others up along the way, then you've truly accomplished something. Today, Chuck Norris is remembered not just as a martial arts legend or Hollywood icon, but as a tireless advocate for veterans' rights. His name has become synonymous with integrity, perseverance, and selflessness. For millions of Americans, he represents the best of what it means to serve, not just in uniform, but in spirit. And though his days of roundhouse kicks and blockbuster movies may be behind him, Chuck's impact continues to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that will endure for generations to come. Through his foundation, his advocacy, and his unwavering dedication to those who served, Chuck proved that true heroism isn't measured by fame or fortune, but by the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you.